Thanks for inviting me, and I just want to make a point that Art Hume was my coach, and I arrived here in '56, and the first team was in '57. It was about 5 or 6 guys wanted to run, and we talked to Art because Art was the track coach, and we talked to Art, and of course. Maybe you don't know the story, but Art was also a football coach. So he was coaching football, and you know, how do you coach 2 sports at one time was kind of what he was trying to do. And so he allowed us as a club team to get started in '57, and Art was we had a manager who kind of understood the workouts because he had been a manager of a high school team somewhere, Springfield or somewhere down in suburban Philadelphia. And that makes a point, very few people came here who had any distance running experience like cross-country running who didn't come from somewhere in that circle around Philadelphia, because the high schools there had the money and had the past interest. Most high schools were just starting cross-country. In fact, many didn't have a track even at that time. So, in fact, I went to Solanco as a beginning teacher in '60, and they didn't have a track even in Solanco. So, Art would give the workouts to the manager, and he would tell us the workout, and that's how we did it. The manager had the clock, and we all ran. And I mentioned the course, but the course was we left behind Brooks Hall. Everything was on the road. And somebody said, well, why was it on the road? My guess is Art was coaching football. He didn't have time to get out and measure the course. He drove his car around. And so everything had to be where you could drive. And we started behind Brooks Hall, went out to 999 Blue Rock Road, and that when it starts down that hill, it kind of goes off the road right now called Old Blue Rock. That road didn't go straight through in those days. There was a place down there called the Country Mill Inn, great old restaurant, by the way. And there was a little bridge there. You go across that bridge, up Old Blue Rock, and you hit where 999 is now. And the first road to the left, there's a housing development, we'll go over to La Torte. And we just come back in La Torte, turn left there at the House Supply, and finish behind the gym. Except, on certain occasions, we ran from Beamsdorfer because we'd run a lap on the track, run the course, and finish with a lap on the track. We start at the end of the quarter of a football game and finish at halftime. So, and I'm sure you did that, didn't you, Si?
Yeah, we did it the other way. We started at halftime and finished in the third quarter.
Yeah. So anyhow, and that's how we started. There were 5 or 6 of us. The picture's 5. There could have been a few more guys. And the other person that really helped was Dick DeHart. Dick DeHart had just come here. It was his first year as basketball coach in '56. Millersville had a great legacy in basketball. They had won like 5 or 6 state teachers college championships in a row under a guy named Max Bishop, who I never met but heard legendary stories about. And DeHart came here, and so we ran 2 or 3 meets, and then we wanted to run in the state college. It was called the State Teachers College meet then, and it was a slippery rock. And it's the first big meet I ever remember running in or being involved with. We went out, Dick took us out in the van. We got to Grove City, stayed in the hotel in Grove City. One of those spectacular fall days. I mean, going out, it was just those mountains out through the turnpike and everything. It was just, just like should be. We get up that next morning, Saturday morning, to run. 4 to 5 inches of snow on the ground. And it was snowing hard when we ran. And I met a guy many of you guys know. The first time I ever saw him was at that meet, Terry Engelman. Everybody, most guys know Terry. He was a longtime coach at Effort. A lot of people around the area know Terry. And he went under similar circumstances. Now that I know him, we've talked about it. he had a he was a Bloomsburg, and he had a college friend who was from Kane. And the two of them wanted to run in the meet. They didn't have a team. They drove to Kane and got up in the morning, came down and ran the meet. And Terry finished high. I don't know exactly where he finished. I think a guy from Slippery Rock won. There was a guy named Shirey who was a really good runner at Slippery Rock then. And I think he won. But anyhow, that's kind of how the first year transpired. And then by the next year, it became a varsity sport. And I think Art was still helping with football. I'm not sure how many years that overlapped. But and we ran a lot of dual meets. Seldom ran a big meet. You know, just didn't do it. It was we ran dual meets. And we ran, I remember we ran Lincoln numerous times, Shaney, ran Bowie State, and then we ran Westchester, because Art was from Westchester. He was a Westchester grad, so he had his buddies at Westchester, and they'd strike a deal for scheduling and that kind of thing. And so we ran, and Westchester was very strong then. They had some really good teams. Other than that, that's kind of how it happened. And you've seen the pictures. By the second year and the third year, you can see the size of the teams picked up, and there were more people interested in. Of course, Art was coaching track, and he was pushing us track guys to run cross country. So it's kind of how it happened. You know, really was a fun time. Really pretty informal. We weren't as serious as guys who win national championships, and so anybody questions, I'll gladly answer a question. But Art, there's one thing I did want to say about Art. He played one point, beside being a coach, he played a key role in my life. I taught 1 year, coached track at Solanco. I was before a guy many of you know, Art Harrington. So anyhow, after 1 year, I was like, you know, I'm not sure this is all for me. I love teaching, I love the kids and all that stuff. Living in a small town, the kind of lifestyle and that. And they used to have these big signs that they put out on the street, like downtown Lancaster. Join the Navy and see the world. Now, some of you may or may not know, but Art was very active in the reserves. And I went over to his house. It's over here somewhere. It was in Hempfield. It was, I forget where it was.
Fleetwood Avenue, maybe?
Yeah, it was back there, back there behind where Lowe's is now, and that general area. And I went over there one night. I said, I'm thinking about, would you talk to me? And I said, I'm thinking about joining the Navy. And I mean, just like I said, do it. Well, the long story short, you know, that summer I was at OCS, and I spent 4 really good years in the Navy. Interesting piece too, if any of you are in education, in those days the draft was in effect. And if you enlisted while the draft, if you were subject to the draft and enlisted, you got, if your school district was obligated to give you a military leave for up to 4 years. So when you came back, you got all your pay raises and your retirement paid up. So, you know, I taught 1 year, came back, and all of a sudden had 5 years experience and was on the 5th year of the pay step of the pay scale. But that was Art's contribution to my life. He said, do it, and so I ended up in the Navy on his advice. Thanks, guys. Anybody question about anything?
How much mileage would you run, like on a day or in a week?
You know, first of all, we hardly ever did intervals except in track season. So, you know, in our typical track workout was 10 times 4, then it was 440. But mileage, probably we were running 20, 25 miles a week at the most. Nothing like guys are doing now.
And they were all, competitions were all dual meets?
Yes, except for and it was a state teachers college conference then. It changed, I think, my junior year and my senior year. They changed the name to Millersville State College. When I entered here, it was Millersville State Teachers College. And there were about 800 students here. And I know that tuition, books, and everything was right around $800. Now the books are $800. But yeah,
Thank you.
really not a lot of mileage at all compared to, you know, as you guys know,
Yeah,
high
how
school
many-
kids are doing that.
How many students were here when you were here?
About 800 when I came.
Smaller than
Yes, sir.
Did you keep teaching at Solanco then?
Yes, I did.
You did? For
But then, well, I did for about 5 or 6 years, and then I went to grad school. I was just telling these guys, I went to grad. They were telling stories about hiking on a trip and moose and that. And the University of Maine has a large. I was in graduate school at the University of Maine. They have this large program for pulp and paper and wood products and all that. You know, they're into that stuff about building bridges by pressing the wood and all byproducts. You know. Anyhow, the university has something called the University Forest. It's huge north of the university, but the cross-country team, cross-country team runs their meets there. Well, it wasn't unusual if you go out and go for a run to see a moose. So anyhow, yeah, I was there about 5 or 6 years.
I was, yeah, Joe, no. I have an interesting story about Art in the military. When after Art got out of coaching and became the department chairperson at Millersville, he was still very active in the reserves, and he would go to summer camp every year. Well, many of you that were there back then remember Rod Bibson. Rod was the trainer, and Rod went to physical therapy school. So we hired a fellow by the name of Joe Denali as the trainer for a year. Well, Art got Joe, because Joe had come out of the military, or had been a lieutenant in the military. And when he came to Lancaster, Art got him to join the reserves here. So when they go to summer camp, Art was a captain or a major, so I'm not sure what his title rank was, but he was a high-ranking guy. He got Joe Denali to be his driver the week they were, or 2 weeks they were at summer camp. So the whole period of time, well, Joe left us then a year and went to Gettysburg and was working in Gettysburg. So they would get to camp and they would be driving Denali was Art's driver. Well, Art had reached a point in his career that he was going to be mustered out because he couldn't go any further. But he wanted to stay in. So he went from whatever rank he had back to a sergeant just to keep more years in the military. The next year they go to camp, Art is driving Joe Denali. All these guys who had been in camp before, you know, always knew Joe as the driver of Art. Now this year they come in, and the next year it's reversed. So that's a backside story.
You know, when you said that, I remembered it. He went back in as a sergeant. I forgot all
That
that.
was the reason.
There's one thing I didn't say. We ran here. Our course here, we ran 5 miles. But it was all over the place wherever you went. We had a meet at Gettysburg, it was only 4 miles. You know, so, and I mentioned to somebody here when I started coaching high school, we were running 2.8. I don't know what you were running at Hempfield.
2.5 capacity, 63 to 65.
So it was all over the place.
Yeah, we were in high school, it was 2.5 in the 70s. I think go up to 3.1 till, now it's late 70s, right?
That was after they probably put the 2 mile in for track.
Yeah.
In track we ran 1 and 2. 1 mile and 2 mile.
What kind of shoes did you wear in cross country back then?
We were, they were like glorified sneakers.
Called the old Converse shoe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, on track, the track was cinder, so we had spikes. But there were most cross-country courses, you ran enough on pavement, you couldn't wear spikes.
What were they doing, what were they landing on for pole vault?
Sawdust.
Sawdust.
I'm
What
going
were
to
their
tell you a
poles?
story when you bring that up. I lived on Lampeter Road. One morning, this is 66 because I just got married. I was living on Lampeter Road, and Flex Steel was out there somewhere. And I got up in the morning, turned on the TV, and Flex Steel had burned. And I got in my car, and I went over to Flex Steel and said, what are you going to do with all those piles of burned foam? And I got a truck and went and got them and made a pole vault and pulled it.
Really? A pit?
Made a pit from the burnings from Flex Steel's fire. And last word, my first coaching job, I was paid $100. $100.
And you thought you were getting a fortune.
Well, I didn't think that.
Berks County paid a little bit better than that, Lee, because we started at the same time, and they paid $200.
Famous pole vaulter, and he was the meet director, he was the coach at Fresno State. That was an Olympic year. And Bob Hayes, nobody had ever heard of Bob Hayes. And all of a sudden, at the college division meet, and so like the 6 top finishers at each event got seeded, they could go to the university. And the university was in Eugene, because they drove from Fresno to Eugene. And Bob Hayes just blew them away in Eugene. And that was an old Hayward Field. I mean, Hayward Field was, in case you don't know, Hayward Field was the football stadium. So University of Oregon played football in Hayward, and they weren't the Ducks. Do you ever know that? They were the Webfoots. And when they became the Ducks, because he struck a deal with Disney to use that character to market their duck things.
So there was no NCAA Division I, II, or III?
No.
No, it was college division, university
That's
division.
why I get fried.
And so, but Bob Hayes just blew him away then, because he was coming out of the college division. Nobody knew him then, you know. He's down in Florida A&M, nobody knew him, and all of a sudden he shows up, and then of course he wins the Olympics too.
Schools that had scholarship people against North.
So these are 2 guys from the '69 state meet, first championship.
Any memories?
We had the most points scored in the meet.
In what events?
I won
All
the-
events, he won everything.
What'd you get,
Long
20-some
time.
points?
At 22 and a half points. I won the 440 hurdles. I won the 440 hurdles, was second in the 440. I was on the 440 relay team that won, and I anchored the mile relay team that was second.
That's what got him into the Hall of Fame.
Yes.
He's Millersville Hall of Fame.
And he had multiple heats leading up
Yes.
to the hurdles and also the
Yeah, I had,
440.
we had
Trials.
440 relay trials, 440 hurdle trials, 440 dash trials. Saturday morning was a 440 hurdle semifinal. And then Saturday afternoon was the finals for everything. So I ran 4 or 5 440 quarter miles and 2 110 yards in 30 hours.
Sounds like a 10,000 meter run.
What was the meet?
It was at Miller.
At
It
Millersville.
was at Millersville.
One of the things that they brought, that these guys will remember, but most you guys won't know, is that when I came to Millersville was in that 68 season, Millersville had 6 lanes on the straightaway, but only 5 lanes on the back, on the curve. I came out of into the first curve, there were only 5 lanes, so that any like the 440, if you ran it in lanes, you could only run 5 people. Well, we measured the track and figured it out. There were 48-inch lanes. The track was wide enough on the home stretch to put 6 48-inch lanes. We could get 6 36-inch lanes from the curve around. So I went to Ray Runkle. This was after I took over as track coach. I went to Ray Runkle and said, we could do this, but we need an engineering firm. So they contacted Huth Engineering here in Lancaster, and they came out and they surveyed the track. And at both end zones, there were pins in the ground. And so they ran radiuses that transitioned the track from 48-inch lanes on the straightaway to 36-inch lanes at the turns, because the only race that it would have interfered with would have been the intermediate hurdles, but their intermediate hurdles were offset all the way till you got to the straightaway, so it didn't matter. So the
It was
track,
also the 330.
No, it's 440.
where they ran, by that time, they ran 440.
Yeah.
So that was done, and then when we put the first all-weather track in, they paid, the lines were then painted on, that was the old black asphalt track.
I will say, and I think Bob can confirm this, sometime around the end of our sophomore year, they did excavate part of the backstretch of the hill to widen the track, and we had a 6-lane track book for our junior and senior year, but the junior year, we could only use 5 lanes of it, because the 6th lane was settling, and then they finally, Dick Miller, who was an awesome groundskeeper, took care of the track, and he finally made it really nice, firm, so that our senior year, we could run 6 lanes.
Wow,
A little different then.
I would say. Anybody else have any memories at all that they want to share? That they're allowed to share?
No.